At the hospital, my parents demanded I cash out my 401k for Nina's care. Then Dad said, "You've been responsible for your sister since the accident." I pulled out the police report that proved everything they told me was a lie. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched Dad's face drain of color as he stared at the official document in my hands, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, gasping for air. Mom's coffee cup clattered against her saucer, the sound sharp in the sudden quiet of their kitchen. "Where did you get that?" Mom's voice came out as barely a whisper, her eyes fixed on the Denver Police Department letterhead. My hands weren't shaking anymore. For the first time in 11 years, I felt completely steady. Jason Miller still lives in Denver. Did you know that? He coaches basketball at Westridge High now. I set the report on their kitchen table with deliberate care. He's been carrying this guilt for over a decade, just like me. The difference is his guilt was actually justified. Dad lunged forward, trying to grab the papers, but I was faster. Years of working 12-hour nursing shifts had given me reflexes he couldn't match. "Nora, you don't understand the whole situation." "I understand perfectly." My voice cut through his stammering excuse with surgical precision. Nina wasn't walking to catch a bus that day. She was on the back of Jason's motorcycle, 3.8 miles from our neighborhood. No helmet because she didn't want to mess up her hair for some party that weekend. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, the familiar yellow walls closing in as the weight of their deception settled between us. Mom's hands trembled as she reached for the papers, her carefully maintained composure cracking like old paint. "We were protecting her reputation," she said, but the words sounded hollow, even to her own ears. A 14-year-old girl on a motorcycle with a 17-year-old boy? The scandal would have destroyed her future. So you destroyed mine instead. The clarity was intoxicating. For years, I'd questioned my own memories, second-guessed every decision, carrying guilt that ate away at me like acid. Now, seeing their panic, I realized something profound. I wasn't the weak, irresponsible sister they'd convinced me I was. I was a registered nurse with an impeccable professional record, financial stability, and the analytical skills to dismantle their carefully constructed lie. Dad tried a different approach, his voice dropping to the manipulative tone I'd heard countless times. "Even if that's true, it doesn't change your obligation to Nina. She's still paralyzed. She still needs care." "My obligation?" I laughed, and the sound surprised all of us. "Dad, I've been giving you $2,000 a month for 3 years. I've worked double shifts to cover Nina's therapies. I delayed my nurse practitioner degree, turned down job opportunities, and sacrificed every relationship I've tried to build because of the guilt you planted in me." I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, turning the screen toward them. But here's what's interesting. I did some research this week. Nina's insurance covers 80% of her care costs. The state disability program covers another 15%. That leaves maybe $300 monthly in actual out-of-pocket expenses. Mom's face went white. The equipment costs, the modifications to the house, were covered by the settlement from the trucking company's insurance. All of it. I'd spent hours on the phone with the insurance adjuster, a patient woman named Rebecca, who'd walked me through every payment made over the past decade. "So where has my money been going?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Dad's jaw worked silently, and I could see him calculating how much I might have uncovered, but I was done with their calculations. I'd been doing my own. "Your mortgage payment is $1,800 a month. You bought a new truck 2 years ago, $22,000. There's the timeshare in Florida you think I don't know about. Should I continue?" The transformation in Dad's expression was immediate and ugly. The mask of concerned parent slipped away, revealing something harder underneath. "You ungrateful little. Careful." My voice carried a warning that stopped him cold. "I've been documenting everything. Phone calls, bank transfers, medical records. I've also been talking to some very interesting people this week." That was when Dad made his crucial mistake. Instead of backing down, he doubled down on aggression. "You can't prove anything. It's your word against ours, and everyone knows how unstable you've been since the accident." Unstable? I almost laughed again. "Dad, I'm a trauma nurse at Denver General. I handle life and death decisions every day. My supervisor calls me the most reliable nurse on our floor." I stood up, feeling taller than I had in years. "And you're about to find out exactly how stable and systematic I can be." The look that passed between my parents told me everything I needed to know. They'd been planning this 401k conversation for months, slowly tightening the financial noose. But they'd made one critical error. They'd underestimated exactly who they were dealing with. I wasn't 16 anymore. I wasn't the broken, guilty teenager who'd promised to take care of Nina no matter what. I was a professional woman with resources, skills, and now, most dangerous of all, the truth. What my parents had never bothered to learn about me was that my nursing background had given me far more than medical knowledge. Working in trauma care teaches you to assess situations rapidly, prioritize actions based on evidence, and execute complex procedures under pressure. Those same skills translated perfectly to investigating my own family's deception. My annual salary of $68,000 might seem modest to some, but I'd been living well below my means for years. While they assumed my financial contributions had left me vulnerable, I'd actually built a substantial emergency fund. $42,000 they knew nothing about. My 401k had grown to $73,000, not the $60,000 they'd estimated. And I'd been systematically documenting every dollar I'd given them since 2019. More importantly, my hospital work had connected me with Denver's legal and professional community in ways they couldn't imagine. Dr. Patricia Hendricks, the trauma center director, had become both mentor and friend. She'd recommended her own attorney when I'd mentioned family financial issues in confidence. Two of the nurses I supervised had husbands working in investigations, one with the Denver Police Department, another as a private investigator specializing in family fraud cases. My position at Denver General wasn't just any nursing job. As a Level 1 trauma center, we handled the most complex cases in the region. I'd been promoted to charge nurse 2 years ago, supervising a team of 12 nurses during critical situations. The analytical skills required to coordinate multiple patient emergencies while managing resources and personnel had sharpened my ability to see patterns and identify inconsistencies. I'd also completed specialized training in forensic nursing, documenting evidence for legal cases involving assault, abuse, and suspicious injuries. This background had taught me to maintain meticulous records, preserve chain of custody for evidence, and present findings in ways that would hold up under legal scrutiny. Without realizing it, I'd been building exactly the skill set needed to investigate my own family's deception. The morning after confronting my parents, I sat in the downtown office of Margaret Foster, the attorney Dr. Hendricks had recommended. Margaret specialized in family law with a particular focus on financial abuse cases, and her initial consultation had been illuminating. "The police report alone changes everything," Margaret said, reviewing the documents I'd gathered. "But let's talk about the broader pattern. You've been providing support under false pretenses for years. That's not family obligation, that's fraud." I pulled out the financial records I'd compiled. They told me Nina's care costs required my contributions, but the insurance documentation shows that was false. They've been using my money for personal expenses while claiming it was medical necessity. Margaret studied the bank statements I'd obtained, cross-referenced with Nina's actual care costs. "This is substantial. We're looking at approximately $60,000 diverted from its stated purpose over 3 years. There's something else." I handed her the recordings I'd made using my phone during recent conversations with my parents. "Colorado is a one-party consent state for recordings, correct?" Margaret's eyebrows rose as she listened to Dad's threats about telling everyone at the hospital about my supposed abandonment of Nina. This establishes a pattern of coercion and emotional manipulation. Combined with the financial misrepresentation, we have grounds for several legal actions. But Margaret's next suggestion surprised me. Before we go nuclear, I want you to speak with Dr. James Richardson. He's a forensic psychologist who specializes in family dysfunction cases. Understanding the psychological dynamics here might help us build an even stronger case. My session with Dr. Richardson was revelatory. A soft-spoken man in his 50s, he listened to my story with the clinical detachment I recognized from my own medical training. "What you're describing is systematic psychological manipulation," he said finally. "Your parents created a false narrative that served their financial needs while simultaneously maintaining their self-image as caring parents. The fact that they involved Nina in the deception suggests this was planned, not spontaneous." "But why target me specifically? Why not ask other family members for help?" Dr. Richardson smiled grimly. "Because you were the perfect victim, 16, traumatized by your sister's accident, naturally responsible and already primed to accept guilt. They shaped your entire adult identity around a lie that served their purposes." He paused, making notes in his file. "The question now is whether you want to focus on legal remedies or psychological healing. My recommendation? Both, but start with documentation. People like your parents don't stop manipulating until they face consequences that make it impossible to continue." That afternoon, I called Detective Mike Torres, recommended by Linda Baker, one of my ICU nurses whose husband worked fraud cases. Torres agreed to meet me for coffee, intrigued by what Linda had told him about my situation. "Family fraud cases are tricky," Torres explained, stirring sugar into his coffee. "The emotional component makes victims reluctant to pursue charges, and perpetrators often claim they were acting in the family's best interest." I showed him the financial documentation Margaret had helped me organize. But this isn't emotional. They systematically misrepresented Nina's care costs to obtain money under false pretenses. Torres studied the records, his expression growing more serious. "This is clean documentation, bank transfers, insurance statements, medical bills. It tells a clear story." He looked up at me. "The question is how far you want to take this. Filing charges will make this very public, very quickly." "What would charges look like?" "Financial fraud, potentially theft by deception. Colorado takes family financial abuse seriously, especially when it involves exploitation of disability situations." Torres closed the file. "But first, I'd recommend having a private investigator document everything officially. If you're going to do this, do it right." The private investigator Torres recommended was Rachel Mitchell, a former police detective who'd specialized in white-collar crime before starting her own firm. Rachel's office was sparse but efficient, and her no-nonsense approach reminded me of the best trauma surgeons I'd worked with. "The beauty of family fraud cases is that the perpetrators usually get sloppy," Rachel explained. "They assume family loyalty will protect them, so they don't cover their tracks carefully." Over the next week, Rachel conducted interviews with Nina's care providers, reviewed financial records going back 5 years, and even spoke with neighbors who'd witnessed my parents' lifestyle improvements during the period they'd claimed financial hardship. Her report was devastating. "Your parents have been systematically misrepresenting their financial situation while extracting money from you under false medical pretenses. The evidence is overwhelming and it's all documented." But Rachel's most important discovery involved Nina herself. "I think your sister wants to tell the truth, Nora. When I interviewed her alone, she became very emotional. She knows about the motorcycle accident, and she knows her parents blamed you unfairly." The next day, I drove to my parents' house for what I knew would be our final conversation. I'd chosen the timing carefully, arriving when Nina was at her physical therapy appointment, ensuring we could speak privately. Mom opened the door with a forced smile that faltered when she saw my expression. "Nora, sweetheart, we need to discuss." "No more discussions, Mom. I walked past her into the living room where Dad was waiting. "I'm here to inform you of the legal actions I'm taking." I set a manila folder on their coffee table. "These are copies of documents I've filed with the district attorney's office: financial fraud charges, theft by deception, and exploitation of a disabled person." Dad's face went red. "You can't prove any of that." "Actually, I can." I opened the folder, revealing Rachel's investigation report, Margaret's legal analysis, and Detective Torres's preliminary findings. $60,000 diverted from disability care to personal expenses, systematic lies about medical costs, threats and coercion to maintain the fraud. Mom sank into her chair, the color draining from her face. "Nora, we're your parents. We raised you, supported you." "You exploited me." The words came out calm and clear. "You built your financial stability on a lie that destroyed my peace of mind for 11 years. That ends today." Dad tried one last manipulation. "What about Nina? If you destroy our family, who's going to take care of her?" I smiled, and I could see that expression unsettled him. "Nina will be fine. Her actual care costs are manageable. Her insurance covers everything essential, and she's been approved for additional state benefits you never told her about." I stood to leave, then turned back for the final blow. "Oh, and Dad, Nina knows about Jason Miller. She's known all along. She's been waiting for someone to have the courage to tell the truth." The look of pure panic that crossed both their faces told me everything I needed to know. Their house of lies was already collapsing, and they could feel the walls closing in. The consequences began immediately. Within 48 hours, Detective Torres had opened an official investigation. The district attorney's office, already sensitized to family financial abuse cases, moved quickly to freeze my parents' assets, pending investigation. Margaret filed civil actions to recover the misappropriated funds, with documentation so thorough that their attorney advised immediate settlement discussions. Rachel's investigation had uncovered additional financial improprieties, including tax implications of the fraudulent medical deductions they'd been claiming. The most satisfying consequence was watching their carefully maintained social facade crumble. Their church, which had held special collections for Nina's medical expenses, demanded a full accounting when Margaret's office provided documentation of the actual costs. Pastor Johnson, who'd praised my parents' sacrifice for years, was visibly shaken when presented with evidence of their deception. My parents' neighbors, who'd watched them upgrade their truck, take Florida vacations, and install expensive landscaping while claiming financial hardship due to Nina's medical costs, suddenly understood the reality. The social respect they'd built on sympathy and admiration for their dedication to their disabled daughter evaporated overnight. 3 weeks later, I received a call from their attorney requesting a settlement meeting. They were offering full restitution plus damages, essentially everything Margaret had demanded. The criminal charges would remain, but the civil case could be resolved quickly. More importantly, Nina called me directly for the first time in years. "Nora, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice thick with tears. "I've wanted to tell the truth for so long, but I was scared of destroying what we had left as a family." "There was nothing left to destroy," I told her. "What we had was built on lies. Now we can build something real." Within 6 months, the consequences for my parents were comprehensive and irreversible. Dad pleaded guilty to financial fraud and received 2 years probation plus full restitution. Mom faced civil judgments that forced the sale of their house and truck. Their social standing in the community was destroyed as the truth spread through church and neighborhood networks. Meanwhile, Nina qualified for state programs that provided better support than she'd ever received from our parents' arrangement. She moved into a supervised living facility with other young adults with disabilities, gaining independence she'd never imagined possible. Jason Miller, finally free from the guilt he'd carried, began visiting Nina regularly, and their friendship helped both of them heal from years of misplaced shame. I used the restitution money to fund my nurse practitioner degree and help Nina establish real financial security. Most importantly, I finally shed the crushing guilt that had shaped my adult life, replacing it with confidence in my ability to see clearly and act decisively. The truth had cost my parents everything they'd built on lies, but it had given Nina and me something infinitely more valuable: freedom to build our lives on reality instead of manipulation. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone else's deception, even when they're family, especially when they're family.